Thanks in part to recent criminal justice reforms, the number of people incarcerated in Massachusetts has decreased. But when it comes to saving money that could be used for other programs, there's little sign of criminal justice dividend. That's the main point of a new report from MassINC. To tell us about the report is the research director for MassINC, Ben Forman. Thanks very much for being with us, Ben.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
But what about the incarceration? How much has it gone down?
About 20% over the last 5 or 6 years. And it's been a steady, straight line down. Every year there's fewer and fewer people in both our state correctional facilities that house inmates serving longer, more serious sentences, and our county correctional facilities.
Well, if nothing else, because of the changing laws around sentencing, what kind of people are we seeing less of behind bars these days?
We're not really sure. We don't have a lot of data on what has driven these reductions and how it's affected the composition of people in correctional custody. Some of it may be sentencing reforms that were done some years ago. Part of it may be just handling people who have serious mental health and substance abuse issues much differently. We know that law enforcement has been much more aggressive about diverting those individuals into care immediately and trying to keep them out of the courts. And then there's just, in general, crime has been falling pretty steadily. And for a long time, our correctional populations were going up, even though crime was going down. And finally, the two trends seem to be coming into line. And again, there's a whole bunch of reasons why crime has continued to decline steadily to the lowest levels we've seen in decades.
Well, given the rise in incarceration going back at least to the 1990, a 20% drop should be pretty significant. So what about savings? I mean, what did you find as far as that?
Well, we found that while the population's come down by about 20%, spending has gone up by about 20% on both the state side and the county side. And so we haven't realized those savings. And the bigger question really is where have all those additional resources gone? Are we doing a better job with the dollars we spend in our correctional facilities of making sure that the people who are released, and almost everybody is generally released from correctional facilities, very few people are there for life. The vast majority of people come back to our community. Are we doing a good job of ensuring that when they come home safely and less a threat to public safety?
Well, if there were money to spare and spend on something else to especially reduce recidivism, what should it be spent for?
Well, job training, prison education. While people are in correctional facilities and have time on their hands, can we help them get some education and some skills so that they can get a job? Because that's a very strong predictor of likelihood to reoffend. And then behavioral health treatment. Criminal thinking is something that we can address with cognitive behavioral therapies, and they've been proven to reduce the likelihood that all sorts of violent offenses will be committed by those individuals in the future. So, and then lastly, just case management, helping people navigate their way back to the community. It's a hard road for a lot of people to travel to find housing, to get a car, to get employment, and the more we can have people assisting them in that transition and return home to the community, the greater likelihood of success.
So where is the money being spent right now?
Well, we don't necessarily see a lot of evidence that it's being spent in those areas. Mostly it seems to be spent on salaries for correctional officers who are guarding fewer inmates. So it's not quite clear why that's the case. And it is a little bit different in the state system versus the county systems. The county correctional facilities seem to have hired more correctional officers to supervise fewer inmates. The state facilities have actually reduced the headcount of correctional officers pretty significantly, about in line with their population declines. But at the same time, they've increased their salaries very significantly. So even though they've reduced the headcount, there hasn't been any savings there. And if you don't have that savings, it's hard to reinvest in the things that we know would keep people safer when they return.
Now, do you
to the
have an
community.
idea about these, salary increases? I mean, are these pretty much the same as what you find in other state agencies, or is this maybe a bit higher?
We haven't compared across state agencies because it's it's a very different job, and it's hard to make those sorts of apples-to-apples comparisons. We just know that they're significantly higher than the pace of inflation over a period where there wasn't necessarily a lot of money to go around for government agencies.
Now, you said that there are more people being staffed in county facilities, and I imagine that can differ from one county to another around the state, right?
Well, and that's another finding as we've looked at this in the past, and we see this again, there's very large disparities in how much county correctional facilities get on a per inmate basis. Some counties get twice as much to serve every inmate than other counties get. And we see that actually translate into what types of services are available to inmates in those facilities. So it sort of depends on which side of a county line you come into contact with the justice system in terms of what your chances are of being able to get some services that will help keep you out in the future.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Ben Forman from MassINC. Ben, what about what goes on in these county facilities? Because there are some sheriffs, they make news by showing they're tough on crime. But then you have people like Steve Tompkins here in Suffolk County, and he's talking about other things, about trying to lower recidivism. I mean, what's going on in Suffolk County?
Well, I think it's really important to think about Boston as a unique circumstance. In much of the Commonwealth, county correctional city facilities are flooded with people who are suffering from substance abuse and mental illness. And they really need health services, not incarceration. In Suffolk County, we have issues with violence. We have guns in the community. And because of that, I think we have to be even more careful about the services we provide to people. Because if they're in a condition where they're not being placed on the right path, it's going to be very problematic, and there could be serious consequences for the community. And also, as we've reported in the past, neighborhoods in the city of Boston have very high rates of incarceration. And research has shown those rates of incarceration leading to more crime, not less, because once it becomes commonplace for somebody to go to prison, the threat of prison doesn't have much of effect preventing people from committing crimes, and it's passed down.
At the map that you produced about that, and I would see those clusters. I mean, there were streets. I mean, if you're growing up in that street, you probably know a few people who've been in and out of prison. I mean, how does that shape your view of the world?
Well, I mean, we know that prison is something that is transmitted generationally. If your father or your uncle had spent time in prison, you're more likely to spend time in prison. It also affects sort of how you view government. If your only exposure to government is in a correctional facility, you might not really have a positive view, and you might pass that down to your kids. You might lead them to believe the system's rigged against you, especially if you're a person of color and you see real racial disparities. We just did some polling on residents of the city of Boston, and it was really interesting to see there's much higher trust in the Boston Police Department than there is in the courts. And if you don't believe the justice system is fair, then it sort of fails to operate effectively. So I think that's one of the things Sheriff Tompkins is dealing with, is trying to restore trust in the justice system, recognizing that there's been too much incarceration in the community that's had really harmful collateral consequences for families, and thinking about what are kind of alternatives to incarceration, especially for young people, because there's a lot of evidence that you take young adults and you put them in correctional facilities, and you've kind of put them on a path toward being a career criminal. And that's an age and stage where people are really malleable, and if we took those young folks, provided them with intense services and other opportunities, the chances are we'd have much better outcomes.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Ben Forman from MassINC.